he divided up all of mankind, when did that happen? Tower of Babel. Okay? When he divided up all of mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now, if you look this up in almost any English Bible ever printed, this phrase will not be there. It will say according to the number of the sons of Israel. But the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls read the sons of God. What this means is that when God decides, okay, this is after the flood, when thought the flood took care of the problem, after the flood, God commanded, gave them the same command that was pre-flood, said, go out, be fruitful and multiply, have a wonderful time, be my representatives, fill the earth, and what do? They turn around and we say, well, we have a better idea. We're going to build a tower here. We're going to build a city and a tower. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to make ourselves world-renowned. We're going to stay right here and accomplish that end. In fact, we're going to use the high technology that has been at our disposal. And where do we get that? Enoch tells us, the sons of God, the Watchers. We think this is really cool. If someone came up to you, essentially a watcher, and said, hey, you want to know what makes the universe tick? You want to know how to use the material world to build things and learn things? We know that. We can tell you. And it's only coming at a small price. The small price being what Enoch says they did, second generation watchers did. They forced the people to sacrifice to them as gods. Worship us, and we will lay the universe at your feet. Because then you can be like us. You'll know what we know. Gnosis, knowledge. Gnosticism is nothing more than watcher theology. Beware of it. But God decides, okay, you want to do that? Fine. You want to worship these flunkies? You want to worship these divine underlings? Go ahead. In fact, I'm going to divide up the earth according to the number of the sons of God, and that means that each geographical region gets to be ruled by them. By one of them or several of them, however it works out numerically. Dave would probably know, he'd probably have some equation for it. However that works out, every place on the earth, you don't want to follow me, you're going to serve them. I'm going to give you what you want. And I'm going to start over. For the Lord's portion, kalak, is a noun related to nakal, is his people. Jacob is his allotted inheritance, his nachalat. Nakal, nachalat, it's their word plays here. God says, I'm going to start over. And what does he do in the very next chapter after the Tower of Babel episode, Genesis 12? He calls Abraham and says, come here, Abraham, I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to start over. And the whole rest of the Old Testament, the story is the descendants of Abraham against all the other peoples. Israel versus the nation. Yahweh versus the gods. That's the Old Testament. And if you miss that, you understand a truckload of what's going on in the Old Testament. Now, Deuteronomy 4 is a parallel passage. Moses is rehearsing this, speaking this. When you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly array, the heavenly host, do not be enticed into bowing down to them. Moses is speaking to Israelites now. Yahweh's portion, Yahweh's people. Don't you dare worship them. Do not be enticed into bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has apportioned. There's the word again, kalak. That the Lord appointed them. He appointed the sun, moon, and stars to all the nations under heaven. But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the fiery furnace out of Egypt to be the people of his inheritance, as you now are. He's saying, look, remember this episode when God divided up the nations, put them under the authority of the Watchers, the sons of God, said, I'm going to give you what you want, but Israel is my own. And Moses tells the Israelites, don't you dare worship them, because you belong to Yahweh. They belong to the Watchers. It is a cosmic and earthly conflict. Deuteronomy 29. All the nations will ask, why has the Lord done this to this land? What happens if we disobey and things go bad? Why is his fierce burning anger? The answer will be, it's because this people, the Israelites, again in context, abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, the covenant he made with them when he brought them out of Egypt. They went off and worshipped other gods and bowed down to them, gods they did not know, gods he, Yahweh, had allotted. There's that word again, kalach. Gods that Yahweh had allotted to them. Again, God deliberately allotted the fallen gods to the nations to distance himself from them and place them under the control of the fallen Elohim. What you have here, this is the Old Testament rationale and explanation for why the other nations have their pantheons. It's because God sentenced them to that status, that position. It was a punishment. You don't want to obey me? Fine. You want to worship these flunkies? Fine. We'll see how you like it. That's why the rest of the Old Testament is, if you want to be in right relationship to God, you have to go through Israel. That's why Israel is called a kingdom of priests. What does a priest do? They're intermediaries. They're mediators. You had to be in the nation. It's also why, just rabbit trailing a little bit here, there are some obscure references in the Old Testament to this idea of divine territoriality, that the nations are under the rule of territorial beings, the fallen gods of Genesis 6. The episode with Naaman and Elisha, you might be familiar with it. If you're not, there was a guy from Syria named Naaman. He had leprosy. He couldn't get healed from it, couldn't get cured. He has a little servant girl who was a slave brought over from the Israelites after some war. And she says, and the little girl walks up to the king, and the little servant says, well, if you got this problem, why don't you just go over to Israel and go talk to Elisha? He'll heal you. And he goes, well, okay, might as well try it. He goes over, and Elisha does heal him, and he wants to pay the prophet out of gratitude. Elisha won't take anything, and then he asks a question. It's so obscure. But he says, okay, if you won't take anything for payment, is it okay if I take some bags of dirt back with me to my country? Elisha says, okay, that'd be all right. And Naaman says, no, I'm doing this because when I have to go into the temple of my God, Ramon, I want to be able to spread the dirt on the ground, and so it'll be okay with Yahweh. He knows that in my heart I'm not really worshiping that God. I want to worship him. Why would he ask for dirt? Because it's holy ground. He wants to take dirt from Israel back to his country. This was their mentality. It's a turf war. The whole rest of the Old Testament. Abraham runs into giants. He runs into the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Amim, the Horites. You'll find out later in verses, these are all giant clans. What's really interesting about this list, some of the terms, when God makes a covenant with Abraham, again, this is God's portion. He makes a covenant in Genesis 15, and he says, I'm going to give you, Israel, the descendants of Abraham, the Israelites, I'm going to give you the land that's now currently owned by these people, Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, all the ites of the Old Testament. And then there's this phrase, this word, Rephaim. What's really odd about this, you'll notice, again, you don't have to read Hebrew, but watch this. You see this little letter here, and this one, the ones in yellow? You notice how all the words end with that little yod? It's called in grammar the gentilic ending. These are people group names. This one does not end with that. People groups, God says, you're going to, in the future, disinherit certain people groups in the land. However, there's going to be one group that doesn't live in just one place. These guys. Rephaim refers to essentially a population not localized in one area. These are your enemies as well. Rephaim were the giants. Now if you look at the holy wars of Joshua, here's the land, the Holy Land. Joshua crosses the Jordan, goes to Jericho right here. It's a good military strategy. If you control the center, you can essentially cut off cooperation from the north and south end. So God specifically tells Joshua, you get this place first, and and you go up north, you go south. Now what I want to show you is these places are going to have geographic names and certain cities. Certain of these cities and certain of these regions, south, north, and middle, were places that God said to Joshua, you go in there and you karem them. Karem means to place under the ban. That means you go in and annihilate everything that lives and breathes. In some cases, even the animals. That didn't happen often. But there are a few occasions when Joshua is told, when you go in there, you leave nothing alive. And what I'm suggesting, if you actually observe the places where that happens, where he's told to do that, the places happen to overlap with places that were populated by, you guessed it, giants. Bashan is going to be an important place to the north of the Sea of Galilee. If you look at Deuteronomy 2, he says, don't go in there and harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, because I won't give you any of their land as a possession. I have assigned Ar as a possession of the descendants of Lot, who was Abraham's relative. It was formerly inhabited by the Amim, a people great and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. And these were the Anakim of Numbers 13, the giants. Like the Anakites, they are counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Amim. No, in Hebrew, Amim means frightful ones, scary ones. This passage identifies the Anakim and Amim as giants. And if we keep reading, you come across a group called the Zamzumim, which are related. Another reference, the Horim, the Horites, who dwelt in Seir. We're going to see on the map where these places are in a minute. Okay, we're going to give you this land as a possession. It says the children of Esau, in fact, they've already done the deed. He goes in Deuteronomy 2, continuing on, he says, you will then be close to the Ammonites, don't harass them or start a fight with them, for I will not give any part of the land of the Ammonites to you as a possession. That goes to Lot. It too is counted as Rephaim country. It was formerly inhabited by Rephaim, whom the Ammonites call the Zamzumim. So this is a giant clan. And again, linking them to the Anakim, the Anakites. The Lord wiped them out so that the Ammonites dispossessed them and settled in their place, as he did for the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir. Also to the Avim. This is really interesting. It only shows up one time. Avim in Hebrew means serpents. It could be serpent worshippers or serpentine something, but they're a clan. Possibly descendants of the serpent, descendants of the Nakash. There could be a linkage. Gaza is a Philistine city. Remember Goliath? Okay, he was a Philistine. The Caphtorim, oh, here we go with Dave's presentation again. The Caphtorim come from Crete. Continue on with Deuteronomy 2. Sihon, the Amorite, the king of Heshbon, is specifically targeted. They send messengers in, solicit for peace, and God's already told them it's not going to happen. You go in and wipe them out. The king of Heshbon refused to let us pass through because the Lord had stiffened his will and hardened his heart. God says, get up, begin the occupation, take possession of the land. Now, who were these people? Sihon and Og were kings over the same people, over the Amorites. Og lived in Bashan. Bashan is the larger geographical region for this place, Ashtaroth. We made our way up the road toward Bashan. The King Og of Bashan with all his men took the field against us at Edrei. Edrei and Ashtaroth are two cities mentioned in Ugaritic texts with this place, but Ugaritic spelled Bashan differently than the Hebrews did. Instead of B-S-H-N, Bashan, they spelled it B-T-H-N. The sh and the th sound in the dialects were the same, but the spellings were different. It's a dialectical difference. Guess what Bathan means in Ugaritic? Serpent. This is the place of the serpent. This was a scary place to the Israelites. And they're commanded, you go in there and you get the job done. Sihon, the king of the Amorites who lived in Heshbon, Og of Bashan, they go in and conquer them. Who was Og down here? Only King Og of Bashan was left of the remaining Rephaim. His bedstead, an iron bedstead, is now in Rabbah of the Ammonites. It is 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide by the standard cubit. That is roughly 13 or 14 feet long. He is from the Rephaim. He was a descendant of the giants. Other places put to the Kerem, Joshua 10, where you have different people groups mentioned. The Perizzites. They go into the territory of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, which is located in the hill country of the Rephaim. Here we have a reference to Arba, the father of the Anakim. The place is Kiriath Arba, also called Hebron. That's a place that was put under the ban. They went up to the Negev and came to Hebron, where there lived Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the Anakim. Okay. The Anakim, part of the Nephilim. Joshua went in, wiped out the Anakim. There's Hebron, Davir, Anab, all these cities. Joshua proscribed them. He put them under the ban. One more example, David defeating the Philistines. The Philistines, at the famous David and Goliath confrontation, the Philistines came and spread out over the valley of the Rephaim. That was where they set their camp. That was their turf. Joshua 15:8. Then the boundary, what's this valley? What's the valley of the Rephaim? The boundary ascended into the valley, which is the Hebrew word Geh, of Beth Hinnom, the Geh of Beth Hinnom, along the southern flank of the Jebusites, that is Jerusalem. So it's very close to Jerusalem. The boundary then ran up the top of the hill which flanks the valley of Hinnom, Geh Hinnom, on the west, at the northern end of the valley of the Rephaim. And where is that? The Hinnom Valley is a deep, narrow ravine located in Jerusalem, running south from the Jaffa Gate, so on and so forth. The term comes from son of Hinnom, the Hinnom Valley. In Hebrew, it is the Geh Hinnom. When translated into Greek, it is Gehenna, from which the word and concept of hell originated. The point is that the valley of the Rephaim was essentially, to the Israelite, hell. This is where the descendants of the Nephilim, the descendants of the Nakash, the seed of the Nakash, live. And in the Old Testament, you have nothing more than a series of episodes. Once Yahweh's portion is redeemed from Egypt and told to go into the land, their first job is to go directly in confrontation with the seed of the Watchers. The Old Testament is a cosmic turf war. Okay, it's not just random, it's not just purposeless. There is a deliberate opposition between one line and another line. It goes all the way back to Genesis 6, it goes all the way back to Genesis 3. And again, hopefully you heard Dave's presentation, because all of these areas, again, are related to giantism, and there are connections with the area of Tyre, the Philistine strongholds, Crete, all these things. Now, when we get to the serpentine presentation, you'll see what the Tyre connection is, because that's Ezekiel 28, where a divine being, again, is expelled from the garden. Same story, but there's a connection with Tyre, or as Dave would say, Sidon, okay, Sidonia. That's what we have for now, and I'm all done. Guy wants to hold the questions. Okay.
It's fine.